Namaste. There's a story I know I told once before, but it bears telling again. It's a true story about when I worked in inpatient psychiatric units. And we admitted a woman in her mid-30s who was schizophrenic and highly delusional. And at the same time, because we were a mixed unit, we had a boy on the unit about Lucas's age. And this woman, we'll call her Sally, was terribly religiously preoccupied. And in fact, her therapist came into her room one day, and her therapist had like all this thick hair piled up on top of her head. She wore a lot of makeup.
Therapist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Had the big hoop earrings, a lot of jewelry on. And Sally talked with a little bit of a lisp. So the therapist goes in there, and we hear Sally scream, "Out of my room, Jezebel!"
Wow.
And she was fixated on this boy and felt that she needed to save him. Unfortunately, in her mind, the preparation for saving him was stripping from the waist down.
For him or her?
For her. And then she would come running down the hallway, and she kind of ran like a penguin, so she didn't get very far very fast, exclaiming, "I have to save him." And needless to say,
Is this in an institution?
a hospital very near where you live.
Oh, okay.
And, near St. Francis.
Oh, okay.
And of course we would stop her, but that never went away. And it reflected another great truth, that it was, if you worked on one of these units, if people talked about Jesus, that was okay. If they got naked, well, it was a little disconcerting, but not terribly, unless they came out of their rooms swinging their underwear over their head, talking about Jesus. And then you knew it was going to be a long night. Now, the reason I came up with all that was this man who's demon-possessed, who lives among the tombs naked. And he recognizes who Jesus is. So, my question is, you've got all this behavior that we would say is erratic. He seems to have an intensified religious sensibility, and he's naked, talking not about, but to Jesus. Is he schizophrenic? And in the Bible, how many demon-possessed people, with air quotes around that, we're not really demon-possessed at all, but we're what we might call mentally ill. And so, the other thing that kind of floats around my head is a question I asked an Episcopal priest once. I said, what is it about frankly psychotic people that makes them both sexually and religiously preoccupied? And his thought was that those are the two most intensely creative human processes that there are. Which ties in really neatly with this woman, in the second reading, Nancy. One of those women's names. Who found this connection between highly creative people and mental illness diagnosis. So, are they really sick? I mean, some of them are, but are they really sick, or are they just terribly inconvenient and hard to control?
Are they what?
Really sick, or just terribly inconvenient and hard to control because they're intensely creative. Because, like she suggests, I gotta find it now, because somebody accused me of this once. God, creative people are better at recognizing relationships, making associations and connections, and seeing things in an original way. Somebody said to me once, you just see the world differently than everybody else.
I don't think they put stoppers on things either. I think they just let it go.
Right. So there's no filter, it comes out, but if I'm somebody that likes order, and I like things neat and tidy, and I don't want anybody pushing me out of my comfort zone, a lot of these people who we say are mentally ill really just push me out of my comfort zone. Now, and I want to be clear in saying, as a person who suffered all his life from depression, I don't think depression is something that, well, it probably pushes some people out of their comfort zone, but that's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about these connections that sometimes we say, oh, this person is sick, we gotta lock them up. I wonder if it's not something in the person, but something in the culture that says, you're pushing us too far, you're too different, it isn't neat and tidy anymore, we better sedate you. And again, I want to keep saying, there are people that need to be sedated, there are people who are criminally mentally ill, and violently mentally ill, if not yet criminal. So, going back to the pigs, there's something in here that really bothers me, and maybe it bothers you. Maybe you never thought about it.
Why do they have to run to that?
Well, yeah. Now, Jesus sails across the Sea of Galilee, and he ends up on the Gentile side. That's not expressly said, but that's where he is. And you know this because it says so, and there's pigs.
Yep.
No observant Jewish person would be a pig shepherd. Pig herder. I guess it's not a pig shepherd. But, or maybe it is. And so, why in the world would those people who were earning their living from raising pigs say to Jesus, oh, you better go away because they were afraid? That's a uniquely Jewish perspective. I think that's why they said you better go away. So they said, oh great, old Bonzo out in the running around naked out there, he's much better, but our livelihood just ran off the cliff. It's time for you to go. So we come back again for people that like to poke at this. Did this really happen? Do we want to put forth a Jesus that says, oh, you Gentiles, you don't need your livelihood? Or are they trying to say something else? Is it that because pigs were really unclean and remain really unclean to a traditional Jewish thought, that the distortion, the illness that had occupied this person needed to go somewhere else unclean? And that you can't look at it literally without distorting it. If you look at it literally, then you get into all kinds of problems. And you start locking up your pigs. If you have a Vietnamese potbelly pig, you go lock it up in case Jesus comes again. Because it might run off a cliff.
And PETA would be against the Christians.
Yes, PETA wouldn't. They probably.
Right.
They may be anyway. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Please do.
So we actually talked about this in our religion class that brought up with Midra. You speak up so she can hear you. So that brought up, just all of that.
Mhm.
And what our professor, theology degree from it,
Okay.
what he had put forth was that when if it was literal, when the demons entered the pigs, it was a difference in nature. They recognized the threat to themselves. They recognized the evil within them, and whereas a human would fight it, they chose
Kill themselves.
to kill themselves too, because they recognized that they had a different sense of it. And they chose to end themselves and to fight demons. It's a really kind of a weird
Yeah.
That was his take, and it was different, and I thought that was interesting. Just the thing that they recognize, you know, when they say that animals can sense spirits.
Right.
You know, that they have a different awareness, and that these pigs, in order to rid, you know, demons, they destroy themselves.
That could have been their point, but today, I would be hesitant to present it that way because for fear that somebody who's mentally ill or believes they're demon possessed might take it as an instruction to kill themselves.
You know, another thing that's so bad, but I think of here is The Exorcist, when they're doing the exorcism, and he said, you know, tell me your name, and Linda Blair, she's like, you know, we are, it was Legion for we are many.
Right.
And then like at the end of like Father Damien, he was like, you know, take me, and said the demon like goes into him, and then he throws himself out the window.
Yeah.
So it kind of was like reminiscent
Yeah.
of this.
The other thing about Legion is that a unit of Roman soldiers was called the Legion. And at the time, of course, Israel was occupied
And preoccupied.
and preoccupied by Rome. And in fact, by the time that Luke would have written, yes, Luke, Jerusalem had fallen to Rome. So to them, Rome was the epitome of evil. Roman soldiers came in groups called a legion. Now they had a demon who was named Legion, go into these pigs. It wasn't overt enough that the occupying government would necessarily pick it out. But the other thing that they could have been saying was the occupying forces were in fact demons. And that would have been, that would have been so subtle that only the Jewish people would have understood it.
Well, and also those who were struggling at the time in the church with opening to Gentiles. Well, at least in this case, the healing of a Gentile led to the destruction of the unclean animals.
Yeah.
You know, some kind of,
Yeah.
it wasn't a herd of sheep.
No, heavens no. Because they're too dumb to do anything organized. So what does all that say then for how we treat people that are different? What does it say about our need for order and tidiness? What does it say about the fact that because of evolution, it's easy for us to recognize the different? I mean, it was a survival thing at one point. Is what's coming at me another caveman, or is what's coming at me some kind of a tiger that's going to eat me? I needed to know that. But now, most of us, except for some elected officials, are more evolved than that, and don't need those cues. So what does it say about how we treat the other? What does it say about our initial reaction to somebody who looks different than us, dresses differently than us, associates with people we don't associate with, loves someone who we don't love, or loves in another way than we do? Can we start to see that our automatic reaction to shut that down? You gotta shut that down. Is wrong and reflects a limitation in how we think rather than the fact that the other is out of the ordinary? I mean, I think we can still look at what somebody's wearing and say, oh my God, that's the ugliest thing I ever saw. And say, but hey, if it works for them, more power to them. If somebody wants, I actually saw hair yesterday that was copper colored, which I'd never quite seen before. If somebody wants copper colored hair, more power to them. I can't quite pull it off. Hardly have anything to pull off anymore. But can we get to that place where instead of judgment, we have compassion? And this, in the short term, is what the East has to offer to the West, is to get out of that mode where we see God as judging and we question God's competence, so we have to do it for God because God might be on coffee break. And start to get to the place where the root of it is compassion, where we start to look for similarities rather than differences, where we look at the differences and are secure enough in ourselves to say, hey, it's not my thing maybe, but they absolutely have the right to do it. That would be, I think, the next step in the spiritual evolution of humanity. I'm not saying throw out Western spiritual teaching. I think Western spiritual teaching is great, but we need to infuse it with a huge dose of compassion and walk away from the huge dose of judgment that is so appealing to us by nature, but at the same time so very, very destructive, not just of other people, but ourselves. Because in truth, whether we realize it or not, what happens to somebody else is what happens to us. What we do to the other, we do to ourselves. We all get diminished when we can't respond from compassion and love. Amen.
Well, don't we want to fit into,
Yeah.
isn't that part of it, that we, that we feel uncomfortable around people that are different because we want to feel like we fit into the group somehow?
But interestingly, I think you're right, but some people aren't limited by that.
Some people
Aren't limited by that. The person who, have you ever seen those pictures in National Geographic where there were tribes that put like a plate in their lip? Okay, to me, I'm sorry, gauges kind of remind me of a plate in the lip. But somebody who has gauges, huge gauges, the big ear, they don't care whether anybody else really likes it or not. So, and it may make us uncomfortable, but we don't have to, Carlton Pearson used to say, you don't have to go along to get along. We need to get to the place where we can say, okay, that looks really weird to me, but I don't need to do anything about it, I just need to not do it.
I just need to be me.
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yeah, and maybe I can use that as an inspiration for me to be myself. And all of us are going to end up with relatively small circles of friends who are probably pretty much like us. Some exceptions. Grinning in the room. But for the most part, that's the case. And if people make us intensely uncomfortable, then we probably just aren't going to hang out there. But what I'm talking about is that seems to be that evolutionary desire to say, well, we got to stop that. We can't have that going on. Those trans people can't be using the bathroom. And I don't know if you saw the meme on Facebook of the cat holding up like the booking slate and saying, you used the wrong kitty litter box in North Carolina. All that stuff comes out of that feeling that it's just not okay for you to be you and me to be me. Or, stated the other way, I'm not okay and you're not okay and that's okay. And it's that thinking that leads to tragedies. It's that thinking that led to Orlando, that said somehow, in the most convoluted of ways, perhaps, the shooter couldn't understand what was going on inside him, and so projected his own struggle out in the form of hatred. And it's never going to change if we don't start changing the way we respond to the other. Doesn't mean you have to marry him. Doesn't mean you have to marry him, although some of us do.
The first time.
The first time around, yes. Not currently. Amen.
You say, don't we turn this off before you get